Welcome back to the Connie Oshimura and Lottie Real Estate Podcast. We talk about everything real estate throughout the state of Alaska. And today, because of all of the inquiries we've had on leasing, both residential and commercial, we're going to talk about that for a few minutes. Connie, do you want to start with residential or do you want to start with commercial?
Okay, well, I want to learn about commercial because I know absolutely nothing about commercial leasing. The only thing I know is enough to get in trouble every time I'm trying to lease for the brokerage to find a place to home. And I don't do a very good job. I always spend too much money on TIs. I always spend too much money on a lease rate, and I don't understand what a CAM is. So here you go. Tell me.
The thing is, we should all do one thing, and we should do it well. And there is not a residential broker or residential developer more accomplished or more successful than you. My advice, unsolicited, do what you know. Do one thing and do it well. Having said that, I'll talk about commercial leases. Commercial leases, for the most part, benefit the tenant. And I say that because a lease is actually a lien on the property. So typically, whether it's a credit-rated national tenant or a small mom and pop on a commercial lease, the tenant controls the property and controls the lease.
I don't feel that way. I feel that I'm a victim of the landlord. So tell me why I should feel differently.
Because you control the asset. You control the asset. So, and that's what a lease does. It gives you ownership in that asset. It's a leasehold ownership, but it's a ownership nonetheless. If they sell the property, the new owner has to honor the lease. The lease runs with the property. Unless the lease specifically says it doesn't, it does. There's a couple of items and clauses in leases that you need to be aware that they do exist, and it might make a difference in rates. Everybody is concerned with what is the lease rate. That's one issue. Term, that's another issue. But there's a lot of other expenses that you may or may not be familiar with. CAM, which is a common area maintenance. And then not every CAM is the same. So what is included in the CAM? If you're leasing a shopping space in a shopping center, most likely there will be CAM charges. CAM charges are the costs to manage the property, to run the property, and that's divided over all of the leases, over all of the occupants of the building. Typically, every CAM could be different, but I'm just going to hit the highlights so you know the questions that you might want to ask or might want clarification on. So, what's included in the CAM? Is it taxes, licenses, insurance? Is it utilities? What's included in the CAMs? And then what percentage of the property does your lease encumber? Are you the major tenant? Is it 50%? Is it 10%? So those are issues that you want to know about in the CAM.
So if you are in a shopping center, for example, so I did have a lease for a short period of time in a building that also had a Starbucks in it. So I ended up paying CAM, not just for the drive area and all that sort of thing, but because it was a national owned by a REIT or whatever, that I felt that my CAM was more expensive. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah, it makes sense. And that can all be negotiated before you commit to a 5-year lease or a 20-year lease. You should have been comfortable with before signing or executing that lease. So, and all of that's totally legal and all of that's industry standard. It's just to what degree.
Okay, so let me ask you the difference between triple net and the other type of lease. Well, can you pay for some of those things? I don't want to pay for anything. I just want to write one check every month for my lease space.
Okay, then what you want, and typically that's more of a full service lease. On a full service lease, and you see that in offices, Class A, even Class B and C office, you'd see a triple net.
Okay.
They pay full service.
So I want to tell you about my Diet Coke. So Warren Buffett, when he goes to the annual meeting and he sits up in front of everyone, he always has a Diet Coke in front of him. Well, because he owns a lot of stock in Coca-Cola, and that's always in the morning. But then in the afternoon, he brings out the C's candy, which he also has an ownership in. Actually, I think he actually owns. He's all of C's. Yeah, he owns all of C's. He owns all of Brooks running shoes as well. So we all have to wear our Brooks running shoes. And so, but right now we're back. So Lottie, how do you go about determining whether or not you have a fair lease rate? What sort of market analysis do you do? Or is it just based upon, I need this space and I need this now, and this is the square footage and this is the location I need to be in? And is South Anchorage more expensive than Midtown, or is Midtown the most expensive? Or what about downtown? That's a lot of questions. Well, that's because I don't know anything about commercial leases.
So I'm going to break it down. I'm going to start talking and hope that I hit some of your answers. If I didn't know commercial real estate market, I would engage with a commercial real estate broker that does. And it doesn't have to be me, but I would find someone that you have confidence in and call that person, because there's too many nuances to the real estate market for anyone to possibly know everything. So that's what I would do. And then different businesses require different types of leases in different locations. If we're talking Class A office or simply office space, that's one thing. Let's go with that first, and then we'll talk about retail leasing or industrial leasing or land leasing. But let's talk about office space. And there's different types of offices. So Class A would be your high rise. In Alaska, high rise is anything over 4 or 5 floors. So it would be a high rise, it would be refrigerated air, it would be non-operable windows. Those are the definition of Class A. A lot of people say their building is Class A if they own it, regardless of what is going on in the building. But the technical term for Class A has to meet all of those things I just talked about. So Class A office space in Anchorage, those leases are typically full service. I would say they are all full service, but then there's going to be something that's an exception to that. So let's just say most of those are Class A full service lease. The landlord pays for everything. Lights, electric heat. You have to make sure we know what kind of heat it is, the garbage, the taxes, the insurance, all of that, everything except cabling. So if you've got a data service or that, then that would be on the tenant. And then let's just stay with that lease and keep talking about other issues with Class A office space and leases, things that you need to be aware of or at least know they exist. So we've talked about CAMs, and that's typically more on retail or industrial. But on office, what we have is a base year. So the base year, if you're moving in 2026, that's when your lease begins, your base year, and it's all subject to whatever the lease writes, whatever is stated in the lease. But if you move in 26, most likely the base year will be 26. So then if the taxes are $2 in 26 and they go up to $3 in 27, there's $1 that's kind of lost, and that is a pass-through. So the landlord's going to pass through that buck to all of the existing tenants in the building. If you occupy 10% of the building, you're going to pay 10%. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that's a pass-through. We need to think about that. We need to think about your contribution, you as the tenant contribution, and the landlord's contribution to tenant improvements, things that will ready the space for your business. So
that's where I always spend too much money.
Yeah,
because I like to have nice things.
Yeah.
So then what happens is I have to stay in the space longer because I spent too much money on my TIs. Does that make sense?
No, that doesn't make any sense. That doesn't make any sense at all. But that's okay. But
I should have called you, Lottie. This is before we got together.
I know.
I to do this partnership. Yeah. Okay.
The landlord typically contributes to tenant improvements. Sometimes you will hear the term TI allowance, which is simply tenant improvement allowance. So the landlord may budget something per square foot to entice a tenant to take the space.
Mm-hmm.
Different offices and different types of businesses have different TI allowances. And the landlord should pay for you to sit with the architect for a few hours to make sure that it's what we call a test fit. Make sure your business works in that particular property. That's especially true for medical businesses, true for any specialty type offices. So the landlord will contribute X amount of dollars. It might cost X plus Y to build out the space to meet your needs. So then are you prepared to pay the Y? So that's how
I think I paid the Y and the X.
Yeah. And that happens if you don't know the market and you don't have anything to base it on, which is why I go back to what I said earlier. Find someone that you have confidence in and someone that knows the market. It's great that you meet someone at church every Sunday and they happen to be in real estate. That's all well and good. It might not be the right person for this task. So make sure you've got the right person representing you.
So should that be your own independent person, real estate specialist, and not the person that has the listing for the lease?
No, it could be the same person.
It could be the same person.
Yes, it can be the same person. Then we get into licensing things, and then it's a neutral agency, and it's all of that.
But they're all working up to the same goal.
They're all
really going to be right.
That's right.
Okay,
that's right. So those are issues on a Class A space. You also might want an early out provision if you're not sure you want to sign a 10-year lease. We could negotiate an early out. And what does that entail? And what are the complications or the costs of getting out early? Then we want to know what the building hours are. If you typically work till 10 o'clock, the air conditioning might stop at 5:30. So we need to know the building hours, your specific use. We need to know what your specific use, that should be stated in the lease. You might not want to have an office building. You might not want to have a medical operator next door to you. You might want it to be all strictly office. So you want to know who's allowed in that building and what kinds of businesses.
Is that why sometimes when I come in on a Sunday afternoon, the building feels a little cold because they've turned down the heat?
Right. And in good property management, you want that to happen. You don't want to heat the space or cool the space, depending on the season. You don't want to temper the air on hours that you're not in the building. So every building, a building being properly managed will have that. So you just need to put that all in the lease. And the cost, if you need to work on a Saturday, what is it going to cost to keep the system up and operating on Saturday so you and your staff are comfortable? Parking should be addressed in the lease. If it's medical janitorial should be addressed in the lease. The scope of work for the janitor should be addressed in every lease. Those are issues that a typical commercial lease has that most residential leases do not. So these are issues that you might want to think about and be comfortable with the ramifications, because some leases outlast marriages. I mean, you're signing in for 5 years. The tenant might be with you 20 years, 30 years. So you just want to be really comfortable. And then the renewal and notices and all of those issues need to be addressed in the lease.
So what I've learned from you today is to stay in your own lane, which is what you told us in the very beginning.
That's right.
Which I did not do, which is why I always think, well, a lease is really simple. I mean, why not? I can do this, right? No,
I mean, you can, but
I can, but
at what price?
right, but there's a price I've paid for doing it for all these years on my own. So I'm not going to be doing that in the future. I can assure you about that. But I'd like to talk a little bit about residential leasing, which seems really simple in comparison to what it is that you've just talked about. The most important thing when we're considering a residential lease is the creditworthiness of the prospective tenant. And so we always do a background check, which always begins with providing the social security number. And that's the number that is the most important when we go to take a look. After that, we look for some credit history, and we even look at social media. They may have a pet, but they're not talking about the pet, right?
Right.
So we're going to have to find out about a pet and a pet deposit. Alaska Economics Trends magazine every year does put out a very detailed listing of rental properties. And they do that through the Alaska Housing Finance Corporation as well to see what a 2-bedroom, 1-bath apartment is. But the one issue that I think is most important now is what you said a little bit. Property taxes increase. Utilities are increasing substantially, right? Water, sewer, gas, and electric. And then property insurance. So one of the things that I think that's very important is renter's insurance. Residential renters insurance. People don't understand, tenants don't understand that they have to have insurance for their interior furnishings and that sort of thing, and probably some general liability insurance as well. We're always talking about slip and falls and getting everything, the snow plowed and all that sort of thing. But in reality, there's sort of a blend here about when you're doing a residential lease, who's going to clean the porch, the step, right?
Right.
And generally speaking, in the world that I live in, that is, unless it's a condominium and a homeowners association, that responsibility falls on the tenant to shovel his walk. But that always doesn't happen.
And for liability purposes, it's probably a great idea to have that addressed in the lease.
Right. And then the other thing that I think is really important, dogs are so important right now. I don't even want to talk about cats, but because everybody talks about their dog, right?
Right.
And, dogs for millennials and Generation Z are, you get a dog before you have a kid, really. So everybody has a dog. And the question is, there are good dogs and bad dogs. Really, there's a dog that barks, at the neighbors all the time. I have one of those right now, and then I have a dog that's a lot more passive and older and all that sort of thing. So you have to have some sort of deposit, and in my instance, I think it's a non-refundable deposit as well. I once owned 154 rental units, and we did our own property management. We had a software system. We had a person cleaning. We had someone on site, and I just couldn't do it. I mean, you still have to make all these small decisions when you're dealing with residential units. And so I decided that I'd be a residential land developer instead because trees don't talk back. That's what I said. Tenants do. So they call you in the middle of the night and all that sort of thing. But our market right now is really very tight as far as inventory for sale is concerned. And more people are renting, actually. And there are articles now that are emerging that the younger generations, the Z generations, et cetera, they can't afford to buy a home because even if they're earning a good wage, they spend it, all right, for living. And so they don't have that savings account for to make their down payment and closing costs. So there is a significant demand for rental housing.
Well, I think people in that demographic also want to be more mobile. So they don't want the permanency of ownership. They like, from the information I receive, they want to be able to pick up and move to Austin in 2 months or spend a year in Italy working remotely. So I think it's more than just the economics of it. I think it's lifestyle choices too.
Well, you have to wonder what that does ultimately for a community and for home ownership. Here in Anchorage, 67.5% of our population own their own home. And that's really a good number. That is about the national average or just a little bit more than the national average. And so I think that bodes well on a long-term basis for our community. But we have such a shortage of housing. We see people now very professional that are renting luxury homes. It's just not a 2-bedroom, 1-bath apartment right now because they're a little bit concerned about the marketplace and various governmental activities and changes. And so there is, I think, a tendency, not just with what you're talking about, but also anytime there's uncertainty, let's put it that way, in a marketplace, then buyers who could buy may just step aside for a little while and see what's happening. We've seen that in a couple of instances where the luxury home market is actually absorbing some higher end newcomers, primarily in the medical or the oil industry, who have made a decision. We're just going to sit out this marketplace, these higher interest rates, and we're renting. Really, quite frankly, I've been in this business for 40 years. It's the first time that I've ever seen that. And, I have a little 2-bedroom, 1-bath apartment with a double-car garage downtown because I own a duplex. And I can say last year I was renting the apartment for $1,600 a month. And now I'm renting it for $2,600 a month. That's just an incredible increase. But that sort of shows the demand because we really haven't had any increase in apartments being built.
Okay, so I'm going to be the devil's advocate for a second. Was 1,600 market rate? And how do you know that 16 was the right number back then? Or was 1,600 the number you charged for rent 4 years ago and no one ever looked at it and said, you know what, it's really now 17 or now it's 18. So what I'm saying is take it to market. I don't think 16 was ever market downtown. So now that it's 26, maybe 26 is market. I don't want anyone to think it appreciated that much or you're gouging them. I'm just, I question the yield.
Okay, so because you know that I read into a business colleague.
Well, the argument is there that right. The question is real and it's relevant. Was that we're basing everything on 1,600 and now it's 26.
Right.
I don't buy it. I don't buy 1,600. I don't buy.
Well, I think you're absolutely right. But I will tell you, in the small duplex market, which we've sold 2 or 3 duplexes recently, what happens is in that marketplace, because we're not sophisticated, we're not well trained to really look at the market. We rent to friends, we rent to families, and then we start. I have this one client that we sold the duplex, and the tenant had lived in there 6 years, and they had never raised the rent because there's something that's not. It's not as professional as commercial leasing, right? It's you sort of end up renting to a family member or a friend or a tenant that just is there for a very long period of time.
And all of that's fine.
Don't get the same.
It's all that's all fine, but I understand that that's a choice. Yeah. I bought my first place downtown Anchorage at age 18. I, of course, couldn't afford to live there, so I still lived with my mother. But I converted the little old house into a duplex and rented it for years. Rented it to this older woman, the upstairs, for, I don't know, I don't remember what it was. But about 10 years into the lease, I went there to collect rent, and she said, oh, I've paid you enough rent. I'm not paying any more rent. I said, what? And now she's about 80 years old. She goes, I paid enough. I'm not paying anymore.
What did you do?
Okay. I didn't do anything. She's 80 years old. What was I going to do? So I quit trying to collect rent from her.
Right.
So it's
not any different than my business colleague that I owned or rented.
But what I'm saying for is you have to look at that. You have to, okay, what's market? Well, market was, I don't know, 2,500 at the time. I don't know. But she was right. I had collected rent from her for 10 years. I was still working. God's been good to me. I could afford that. She couldn't. So, okay, you're not paying rent anymore. So all I'm saying is just because something is doesn't mean it's market.
Right. Okay. And I think that's right. But I'm not going to try that with my landlord here.
No. Sorry.
I've been here 5.5 years, right? I paid you enough money. I'm not going to pay my rent anymore.
No. That's just a story. You're talking about stories. I got stories.
All right. Okay. I think this is it. I hope everyone has enjoyed this podcast. I think we've learned a lot that there's a difference between commercial real estate and being very professional and having a professional help you and renting out your duplex apartment, which is probably not ever going to be at market rate because it's to a family member, a business colleague, or, a tenant that's lived there 6 years and, you feel sorry for them. And so you don't want to raise their rent.
Yeah. Okay. So we started talking about leases today because you all asked for information on leases. So tell us the other topics you want us to touch on, and we'd love to address those and bring those into the library as well.
And remember who we are. We're Connie Oshimura, broker owner of Berkshire Hathaway Home Services, who still sells real estate, and
Lottie Michael, and I've been doing this commercial real estate for a long time in the Alaska market. So give us a call and let us know what we can do to help you or answer a question, or we'll go from there.
And just for your information, we started when we were very, very young, right?
Yes.
Yeah. We were very, very
well. Actually, I was the youngest person to get a broker's license in the state of Alaska. So I took the exam as soon as I turned 19. Had these hours of education that I was sat through, too young to take the exam. So yeah, we did this.
Yeah, we were very young when we started.
We're still young.
Yeah, we're still young.
All right.
Okay.
Thanks. See you next time.